individual host and their guests do not necessarily reflect those of Para X, its affiliates, or its sponsors.
Supernatural, metaphysical, paranormal. You know, all those things you've been wondering about? Are you ready to go deeper into the realms of the unknown? I hope you've got your walking shoes on, because life is an adventure, and this is the journey. Come on, let's go. Hello and welcome to the show, everyone. This is the Journey Radio Show, and hey, we're the She-Squatchers. I'm Jen Cruz, your host, and I've got my trusty teammate, Jenna Grover. Hi, Jenna.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, we don't have Tammy with us tonight because, unfortunately for us, and very fortunately for her, she's on vacation. She's gone on a lovely trip with her children, and I'm so happy for her to get away and have a good time. So I'm going to try not to feel too jealous. And as we head into our night, we've got an awesome guest for you tonight. We've got Mike Quast from Minnesota joining us tonight. He is an author about Bigfoot books, and he's got lots to share with us. So welcome to the show, Mike.
Hi, nice to be here.
Hey, I'm so excited to visit with you tonight. I know that you just live down the street from me, but hey, it's hard to get together sometimes. Yeah. Anyway, so can you tell our listeners a little bit about yourself and how you got interested into the Bigfoot topic?
Well, I was always really just kind of naturally drawn to every paranormal subject under the sun when I was a kid, including Bigfoot. I remember that movie, The Mysterious Monsters, coming out in around 1975. I was just enthralled with that. My mom still remembers me just sitting in stark silence all the way home from that movie. But in 1976, when I was 8 years old, I had my own Bigfoot sighting at a place called Strawberry Lake in Becker County, Minnesota. In the summer, a couple times during the summer every year, my family, we were a farm family, but we would take like a Sunday to go on a drive for the afternoon. And this was a wilderness area we were driving through. My parents were in the front seat, and my sister and I were in the back seat. And for some reason, I was the only one in the car that saw this. Just all of a sudden, about 150 yards up the road, I saw this black object standing right at the edge of the road, about 7 feet tall. And my first thought was that it was a burned tree trunk, because that's pretty much what it looked like. But then it suddenly stepped away from the road on 2 legs and walked into the trees and disappeared. I had it in sight for around 10 seconds or so. And even at that age, I knew I wasn't looking at a bear. And when I thought about it later, I was like, well, it's not likely that somebody would be wearing a costume and trying to scare people if he only let them get that quick of a look at him. So right away, I just thought I just saw a Bigfoot. And at that time, it was the weirdest thing to me because I thought that Bigfoot was just a Pacific Northwest thing back then. I had no idea the number of reports that had already been in Minnesota at that time. But I just never forgot that. And as the years went on, when I was in high school, I knew that as soon as I was out on my own, I was going to want to get into researching and traveling around the state and meeting other witnesses. So as soon as I was out of high school, that's what I did. 1987, at about 19 years old, started interviewing my first witnesses. And the first case that I ever looked into was something called the Hairy Man of Vergas Trails, which is just a local piece of folklore around where I grew up, around the Detroit Lakes area, that I just happened to hear about. And the story it was like a campfire story that people would tell. The story was that some old crazy hermit had gone to live in the woods to get away from civilization. And over the years, he'd grown hair all over his body. And people would just occasionally see him, and he would chase people out of the woods. And it didn't sound like a real story to me, just for the fact that I knew that a person cannot really grow hair all over their body. Now, if you went to live like that, yeah, the hair on your head and your facial hair would grow, but not all over. It made me wonder if a Bigfoot might be involved. So I started asking questions as to who all claims to have seen this thing, and I was able to meet a guy named Ken Zitzo, who was my very first witness interview that I ever did. And his story was no mundane sighting that he had to tell up. In 1968, him and his brother and his brother's girlfriend were driving through the area, and this thing jumped out of the ditch and attacked their car. He described it as 8 feet tall, looking like a man's body with a gorilla's head, all covered in hair, and with a big beard hanging down from its face. And he said it just leaped out of a ditch like a 20-foot broad jump into the middle of the road and just lashed out at their car with its fist and put a big dent in the hood. And so later they started searching the area, trying to see the thing again, and they would see it running through the moonlight on some nights. And they got it into their heads they wanted to get rid of this thing. And eventually, well, winter came and they didn't see it during the winter, and they wondered if it might be hibernating. And then in the spring, they found this old shack with a big hollowed space dug out underneath it. And they thought, well, this might be its den. So they set fire to the shack and burned it down. And then they never saw the thing again after that. But I did hear about other people seeing it. And the local paper out of Detroit Lakes even covered it as a Halloween story one year. And they wrote about another car being attacked where Vergas Trails is a place where kids like to go and just cruise around at night and party and stuff like that. And someone reported that this thing that looked like a big ape had jumped out of the trees onto the hood of their car as they were cruising through the trails. And so there were just several stories like that. And so it was the place where I did my first field work. And 1989, towards the Detroit Lakes end of Vergas Trails is where I found my first Bigfoot tracks. They were 16 inches long and 3-toed. They're the only 3-toed ones I've ever seen. So I kept searching that area, and eventually I found 2 other sizes. There was a 20-inch track and a 12-inch track. So it made me wonder if the hairy man had picked up a hairy family at some point along the way. The 12-inch track was missing a couple of toes, and it was bent. It's like it was a crippled foot. So into the early 90s, I found those tracks here and there on a sporadic basis. And I think the last time I saw them was 1993. And then I never found any more after that. But people had started to move into the area and build more houses. So it just made me wonder if the things had finally left the area because it wasn't remote enough for them anymore. So anyway, that was the first Bigfoot episode that I ever investigated. There was a really interesting case that I got onto in 1990 up in Clearwater County, the White Earth State Forest. There was this old retired tracker and trapper that lived up there named Ed Trimble, who was finding Bigfoot tracks on his property. He was 76 years old at the time, and they were not typical Bigfoot tracks, though. He could tell that they were bipedal, but they were more circular shaped than human-like footprints. But they did have 5 toes. They had 2 large toes and 3 tiny ones. And they were about the size of like big grizzly tracks. They weren't like huge like a typical Bigfoot track. But the fact that they never went down on all fours made him think, okay, this is definitely something unusual and similar to Bigfoot, which he knew about, but he'd never really had a firm opinion either way about it. But he contacted the DNR and told them, and they knew about me by that point, and they referred him to me. So he wrote me a letter, and I drove up and met him, and we struck up a friendship and visited with him several times for a few years. He never had any sightings, but he kept finding these tracks, and he started hearing weird howls in the night, which I heard myself one night camping at his place. That was my first time hearing vocalizations, which really freaked me out at the time. I wasn't ready for that. I'm just in my early 20s camping out there all by myself, and suddenly hear this this noise just erupt out of the night that I described at the time as sounding like an Indian war cry, but with the voice of a police siren, if you can imagine that. And it kind of sounded like two of them calling to each other for about a minute or so. So that happened. And Ed, yeah, I think I was the first to hear those howls, and then Ed himself started hearing them afterwards because he would go outside of his house at night and listen for what I had described, and he heard it a few times. He also kept beehives, and he had some damage done to his beehives that was not like typical bear damage. He knew what bears would do to beehives, but something was breaking into his hives without leaving the teeth or claw marks and eating the honeycombs out of them. But no sightings ever happened there on Ed's property, but he introduced me to a bunch of his neighbors who had sightings of typical looking Bigfoot creatures. And there were also more typical looking Bigfoot tracks found in the area too. It was like there was two species of them up there. The typical Bigfoot tracks were never found with the more roundish tracks. It was like the two species were avoiding each other, and they didn't mingle with each other. But I knew Ed for a few years, and then his wife had to go into a nursing home, and so he moved away to be closer to her. And then eventually they both passed away, as that's what happens when you make friends with elderly people. But Ed was like a mentor to me for a while because he was like, I called him the old man of the woods. He knew everything there was to know about the wilderness. And so he taught me a lot about just being out there and, how to handle myself in the woods.
So you said this was on the White Earth Forest. Are you talking like Rice Lake area, Zirkle?
Zirkle, yeah. He lived just a mile or so from Zirkle.
Okay. I always get a squatchy feeling when I go through that area. And it's a dead zone too. There's hardly any cell service there.
Yeah, there's a part of the White Earth State Forest called the Buckboard Hills real close to there. And that was my main area of searching for several years. And a lot of other Bigfoot stories came out of the Buckboard Hills, going back to like the 1940s.
Okay.
Then I think it was 1999, there was a huge thunderstorm that went through the area. It was like a hurricane force storm. And they said up to 1 million trees were blown over. And after that, once the roads were cleared, loggers had to go in and clear the roads. And once I was able to get in there again, I never found Bigfoot tracks in there again. It seemed like that storm kind of might have had something to do with that. Anyway, that whole Clearwater County episode was, I did a whole book just about that. Yeah, that's another thing about me. I've always been a writer my whole life. But when I was little, I liked to write stories and comics and things like that. So when I became a Bigfoot researcher, it seemed like the natural thing to do to start writing books on the subject. I did my first one on an old manual typewriter in 1990 called The Sasquatch in Minnesota. And I was just before I met Ed. And it felt like what was going on around his place deserved its own book. So I did a second one in 91 called Creatures of the North, the New Minnesota Sasquatch Encounters. And then it was 1996 before I did another one. And that was basically an updated combination of the first two. I put both of those together in one volume with a bunch of new stories added to it. In 2000, I did a book called Big Footage, which was about all the different photos and films of Bigfoot that people all across North America claim to have taken over the years. And there are a lot more of them than people know about. And I couldn't even do that book today because there's so many now. The whole internet is full of Bigfoot videos. But instead of going through all the copyright laws and getting permission to use the actual photos, I'm also somewhat of an artist, so I did artist's renderings of all the ones I was able to collect and showed them that way. So yeah, that was 2000. I did Big Footage. And then I didn't do any more books for a long time until 2019, I think, was when I came out with a book called Bigfoot Chronicle. a researcher's continuing journey through Minnesota and beyond. And the beyond in the title had to do with the fact that in 2017 and 18, I went out to California because in 2017, they had the 50th anniversary of the Patterson-Gimlin film, and there was a big gathering out there at Willow Creek and Bluff Creek where people were visiting the film site. I thought, well, if I'm ever going to visit California, this seems like the time to do it. So I flew out there and I met some of the famous people at the time. I met Daniel Perez and Jeff Meldrum and Cliff Barrickman. And I had a rented car and I got up into the mountains. I got to this parking area, which is the closest you can drive to the Patterson film site. And it's about a mile walk past there. But it happened to be pouring rain that day. And the trails coming in, well, first there's like a 15-mile paved road up the mountain, but then you have to turn onto these just awful dirt roads, about 5 miles worth of that to get to the film site. And with the rain coming down, the people that were there, Cliff Barrickman included, he told me, these trails are getting worse and worse. You might not get out of here in this car that you have if you stay much longer. So I made the call to not take the walk down to the film site and to get that close and not make it. That really stung. So I said, well, I got to make another try for this at some point. And so I went back less than a year later in September of 2018, and it was gorgeous weather then, and I got there. And so I wrote a whole chapter in this book, Bigfoot Chronicle, about the Patterson-Gimlin film and my trips out there and my experience of getting to see the film site, because that was a pretty big highlight in my life.
That would be a highlight for me too. I would love to go there.
Yeah, well, it became a little bit of a misadventure on the way out because I got a flat tire, and then some people happened to be out driving around, and they stopped to help me with the tire, and then my rental car that time had this automatic locking mechanism on the doors, and I ended up getting my keys locked in the car, and having to get a ride back down to this little town of Orleans and calling for a tow truck to come and unlock the car for me. And it got dark and I ended up not getting back to the hotel I was staying at until midnight that night. But it's all, I can laugh about it now. It's all part of the adventure.
Well,
It is.
Now, looking back, when you did go there, can you tell us what it looked like? Because I've never been there personally. I would love to be there, but obviously it's not going to be looking the same. Are there buildings there, or are there still trees? How does that look? Tell us.
There are no buildings there. It's dense wilderness. And there'd been logging done at the time of the film, so it was a lot more open than it is now. There's a lot more forest growth along the path that the creature walked on now. And what struck me about it was that it's a lot smaller of a site than you get the impression of from watching the film. It looks like a huge clearing in the film. It looks like the trees in the background are really far away, but they're a lot closer to the camera than you realize from seeing the film. And so since the place is smaller than you first think, that gives me the impression that the event probably happened a lot faster than the film gives you the impression of. And that Patterson was really lucky to get as good a footage as he got.
Definitely.
Yeah.
That made me think of the forest that I grew up in over on Mashog Creek and the Wild Rice River in by Twin Valley or Hyberg Park on Highway 32. That's close to Monoman area. Anyway, that forest had a big clearing in it when I was growing up, and I always thought that somebody had cleared it and was going to build a house out there, and nobody ever did. And I always thought somebody was going to build something here or whatever. And when I went back, I grew up in that forest. I was always in it. And when I was 17 and about to graduate high school, I heard what sounded like a mountain lion roaring, which I'd never heard before except on Grizzly Adams. And I was like, that was a mountain lion. And I went home and told my mom, and she kind of laughed it off. And we don't have mountain lions here. Well, they do. They've been sighted there many times now. And I was scared to go back in the forest after that. Well, I went back 20 years later 20 years later, and I walk back to that clearing, and it is not very big anymore. It's grown in considerably. Almost that clearing is almost gone. So it's amazing to see how 20 years difference can make. And you're talking about a 50-year difference with the Patterson-Gimlin film. I can just imagine how different it looks today.
Well, there's a group of guys out in the Willow Creek area called the Bluff Creek Project, who have documented the site within the past few years, because the exact spot was lost over time. People couldn't pinpoint exactly where the creature walked anymore. They knew it was within like a quarter-mile stretch. But these guys went in with frames from the film, and they were able to identify trees that were there then that are still there now. And they've reclaimed the site and pretty much proven that they have the right spot. And there's this red ribbon tied onto a bush now that's on the exact spot where Patterson knelt down once he stopped running to shoot the footage. And I was able to eat my lunch on that spot.
Oh, wow. That's awesome.
And I was just going to say,
pictures of yourself there.
Yeah, I did. Another maddening thing that happened though, I shot a bunch of still photos on my phone, and I shot about a 5-minute video. And when I got home, I transferred all my still photos onto my home computer, but not the video. And then I lost the phone. So I lost that video. So that was another kind of big blow. At least I still have the pictures.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, but that stinks. It's like you had all these incredible experiences, and then you lose the film. Oh, no.
I was going to mention something since you mentioned mountain lions in Minnesota. I saw a mountain lion in the Buckboard Hills while I was out there Bigfoot hunting. So, and also up in the Chippewa National Forest. That's one of the main areas where I've been searching for the past 10 years or so, since there's been so much activity up there in recent times. I've put trail cameras up there, and I got pictures of mountain lions in 2 different locations, 30 miles from each other. So I'm thinking there must be quite a few of them out there.
Oh, definitely. Definitely. Have you looked anything at like the Tamarack Wildlife Refuge? Which is
that was a place my family liked to visit a lot when I was a kid. I like to climb the fire tower that's there. I don't know of any specific Bigfoot activity on the refuge.
I just
close
think
to it, I think. But
I think that there probably are Bigfoot there. I mean, especially since they don't allow any camping on the refuge, so you have to leave before dark.
yeah, and it's not too far from the Strawberry Lake area where I had my sighting. And
Yeah.
I met this family a few years ago that had some sightings in the Richwood area, which is also close to Strawberry Lake. So it tells me that my sighting there wasn't as, such a freak occurrence as I first thought it was.
Yeah, definitely. I thought, see, now here's the thing. I heard something and I can't even remember where I heard it. And it might have been on a podcast or something. That's probably what it was, because if it wasn't you telling me this, then it was probably a podcast that somebody was talking about people having Bigfoot experiences by Tamarack. So,
okay. Yeah, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
But,
it's such a large area and it's so protected.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would run there if I was Bigfoot. Definitely. So yeah, definitely. Wonderful areas. These are all home areas to me, growing up, being affiliated with White Earth Reservation and growing up just a couple miles off the reservation border. And, being part Native American, I'm actually a Red Lake band member. So even up
I know there's a lot of Bigfoot stories from the Red Lake Reservation.
Oh, yeah. And it's hard not to find something when you go up there. Seriously. We have really good luck up there. And, it's like, well, it's very unpopulated. And I know that a lot of the sightings and encounters that people have, they don't necessarily report to Bigfoot researchers because in their belief, it is a spiritual message to them about their own life. So they go talk to their spiritual advisor about interpreting what this means to them in their life. And so we might not hear about it. I get to hear some of the more stories of that sometimes because they know me and they know I'm interested in Bigfoot. But definitely we found quite a few things up there and footprints and in multiple places and definitely the stick structures are more like dens and large homes with towers, and sometimes they even have like it has like a doorway, and you go in and there's a whole area that's cleaned out that you could literally lay down on. Something very large, something's very large could lay down in there, and some of them have like the trees are like stacked on top of each other, and the branches and the little sticks are weaved together very tightly to hold it together. Nothing is tied or used twine or any kind of tools to do that, but everything's just weaved together very tight, and that holds it together. And I literally grabbed a hold of one of these walls and shook it as hard as I could to see if it would come apart, and it wouldn't. It was really well built. And some of the structures that are being found that look like this up there, because there's quite a few of them, some of them have holes dug into the ground inside of them that go down into a tunnel/cave den area under the ground, which I think is probably necessary for them to make it through the winter if they're not using fire, right?
Yeah, and I've seen structures like that down in Fort Snelling State Park. There was a researcher that had a YouTube video about that place, even though it's in the pretty much dead center of the Twin Cities area. It's a wilderness area where two big rivers come together. And this researcher was claiming that Bigfoot was there in this park, right in the middle of the cities, like next door to the airport where big planes fly over all the time. But he was talking about all these elaborate structures. And so I went down there to check it out myself, and he wasn't kidding. It was things like you were saying that you could walk into and stand up in and lay down in, and it made me wonder, okay, is this Bigfoot or is this a bunch of Boy Scouts coming out here to practice shelter building? I mean, it's got to be one or the other. It's either Bigfoot or humans. It was just surprising that it was in the middle of the Twin Cities like that.
I think they travel along the rivers like that too, because there's
Yeah,
a lot of
I do too.
a lot of game there. And you see the turkeys and the deer and all kinds of. I've even saw a fisher one day in my neighborhood, and I live maybe, I don't know, 8 blocks from the river. So, and there was a fisher in my neighborhood, like running around like he was so scared and lost. I was like, oh, that poor thing. I'm like, that. At first I thought it was a cat, but then I looked at it, I'm like, that is a fisher. How interesting is that? Sherry's in the chat room asking, are these structures near water?
In Fort Snelling, they are. They're, like right on the riverbank there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And I'll say also up on the reservation, there's water everywhere. Like there's the largest body of fresh water completely contained in the United States is on that reservation, and it's not too far from there. And there's all kinds of little lakes and rivers as well. So yeah, there's water everywhere. I
had a pretty harrowing adventure up at Red Lake too, back several years ago.
I'm going to want to hear about that after the break. So let's go to our commercial break and we'll come back with that story. Stay tuned, everybody.
Okay.
All right, good job. We are on break.
Yes. Sorry, guys. I had to pull out the Hershey Kisses. Oh,
Jenna, that's not fair.
I know it isn't, but guess what? You'll have them one day too, and I won't. And I'll be jealous of you.
I have a candy bar from Aldi.
I like Kisses, Hershey Kisses.
The one I gave you when you were in the hospital? Those candy bars?
I like Take 5.
I brought you chocolate bars with almonds in them. I told you they were my favorite, these giant chocolate bars. Don't you remember?
Oh, yeah, I must have eaten it. I must have liked it.
Shut up.
Oh,
Oh,
so
she's
thank you.
terrible. Yeah.
I know.
Anyway, ta-da. Well, we're already halfway through the show. Is that shocking?
Yeah, it's going quick.
It is. It goes quick. It's easier than you thought, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're
Well,
doing good.
I've done a couple of podcasts before, just the audio, but never been on stream like this before.
Awesome. Can you see us now?
Yeah, I can see like half of you. I can see all of Jenna, but
I love
Well,
it.
you get
I
all
just
of
see the-
Jenna.
I just see
That's
the right
good.
side of your face.
Oh, all right. Well, when you watch it later, you can see all of me then.
All
of my
of
face.
her. I almost started singing. All of me. But I won't. I'll
Right, we
stop.
should be going back to the show soon. I'm waiting for the go from Sarge.
I need to lead into talking about my most recent book too.
Yes, but we want to hear that Red Lake story, and then you can go into that.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. I'm just watching for the go. And welcome back to the show, everyone. This is the Journey Radio Show, and we are the She-Squatchers. Won't you check us out online at She-Squatchers.com. There you can click on our events page and see the upcoming events we'll be at, and you can come and see us. There is one in the works that is not on there yet. I'm just waiting for the confirmation that we are a go with our contract, and then it will be added. It is in November, and you're going to be excited to hear about it. December, since the word is out, I heard that Carrie Arnold has been saying it to everybody on his show. We She-Squatchers will be in the 168 this year. How exciting is that? For those who don't know what that is, the 168 is by Bigfoot Odyssey. It's a yearly, I think this is the second time they've done it, a 168 straight hours of Bigfoot research on location. And we've been invited to take part in that, and we'll have our own camera crew going out with us and following us around as we research this wonderful area in the state of Florida. I'm not going to say where, but it's in Florida. So very looking forward to doing that in December, especially because it's in Florida and I live in Minnesota where it's cold in the winter time. So it'll be perfect little trip for us to go look for Bigfoot in Florida. I'm totally excited. My girls are excited, and we can't wait to get to it. We did a really big expedition last year too, up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. That was fun, but we weren't able to stay the full week because we were committed to be at a different conference. So we weren't able to stay the whole time. And I am so excited we're going to get to stay for the full 168 hours in Florida this December. So looking forward to that, and I'm sure you'll see lots of videos, and they're going to give us their own documentary out of that. So that'll be a fun time. So we are back to the show with Mike Quast, author of many different Bigfoot books, and he was about to tell us a story about Red Lake. Can you tell us more?
Well, I think it was in 2003, I had interviewed a man from Baudette who had some Bigfoot experiences north of Upper Red Lake in the 1970s. And so I went to check out that area. I had some vacation time coming and I wanted to go camping up there, but on this a weekend day, I went up to scout the area for camping sites. And I was on this gravel road, and all of a sudden the road just kind of ran out on me and turned to mud. And suddenly I'm all alone and I am badly stuck in the mud. Like I was not getting out of here without a lot of help. And I'm in the absolute middle of nowhere. I knew I was 20 miles into the woods from the nearest county road that I had come on. Ended up spending the night in my car because it got dark on me. But before that, I went out walking in the evening, hoping that somebody would come along and pick me up and rescue me, but nobody did. And once it got dark, I started walking back to my car. And that's when I suddenly had what I believed to have been a supernatural experience, which was that I was feeling really scared and keyed up and nervous at this point. Like, how am I going to get out of here? And all of a sudden, I saw up at treetop level a bunch of little dancing points of light that I first took to be fireflies, but it was spring. It was too early in the year for fireflies. And as I watched them, they all came together into one great big ball of white light, 2 or 3 feet wide. It just floated along for a few seconds and then faded out and disappeared. But the weirdest thing was, you'd think a person would be freaked out seeing something like that and even more scared than I already was, but I had this strange feeling of calm settle over me. And I knew what I had just seen, or at least I believed what I had just seen. I believed it was my guardian angel. And it was telling me, calm down, I'm here, I'm with you, and you are going to get out of here and you're going to be okay. So I spent the night in my car. During the night it rained and the car got even more stuck. And the next day I ended up walking 20 miles to get back to that county road. I walked all day for 9 solid hours. Well, not solid hours because I kept stopping to rest a bunch of times. I told myself I'm going to walk for 30 minutes at a time and rest for 5 minutes. But as the day went on, my rest breaks started getting a little longer and a little more frequent. And I found out how good a shape I was in for my age at that time, which, I had not been working out, and that day really took a toll on me. And by the time I got to the county road, I just collapsed in the ditch, and it was 5 o'clock in the afternoon by that time. And I said, I'm sitting right here until somebody comes. And in about half an hour, somebody did. It was this old Norwegian farm couple that was on their way to go berry picking. And they rescued me and took me back to their farm, and I called a friend of mine to drive all the way up there and pick me up. And then he had to come up twice more with me to get my car out of the mud. That's how badly it was stuck. It took hours to get it out. But that's my Red Lake story.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear about that.
Did not find Bigfoot, but ended up having what I believed to be a supernatural experience up there.
How beautiful, though. I mean, to feel that was you said you felt like that was your guardian angel?
That's what I believe, yeah.
That's beautiful.
Was there a color to it?
It was just white light.
White light. Okay. That makes sense. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, if that's what you felt, that's probably what it was.
I was going to say something about how you before the break, you were saying something about how there's a lot more reports out there than ever actually get reported to some authority figure that people just keep to themselves. When I did my book, Bigfoot Chronicle, my first idea with it was that I wanted it to have an appendix where I listed every single report that I've been able to collect from every available source for the state of Minnesota. And it turned out to be almost 700. Which just floored me. I couldn't believe it was that many. It was 696, I think, and I've collected more since then, so it's well over 700 now. And I think that if somebody was to do the kind of research that I've done in a state like Washington or Oregon or California, you'd probably come up with 2,000 or 3,000. If you visit with every available source of other researchers that you network with. And don't just depend on what you're able to come up with yourself from your own research, but cooperate with others to build the biggest database you can. There's got to be just thousands of reports out there that nobody is hearing about.
Definitely.
And
Definitely.
one major episode that I wanted to mention is the subject of my most recent book, which I have a copy of right here, called Sasquatch Central, High Strangeness at a Northern Minnesota Homestead. And I wanted to mention that all my books were self-published over the years. I would have them done at local print shops. But in just last year, Doug Hychek, who's the producer of Monster Quest, lives down in the Twin Cities, he decided that he wanted to get into the publishing business, and he offered to have professional versions of all of my books done up. So I do have 4 books now available on Amazon. They sell for around $15 a copy, I believe. So that's where those can be found. But in 2019, I happened to hear about this case up near Black Duck, Minnesota, which is about a half hour north of Bemidji. There's a guy who lives on a piece of private property up there. His name is Randy Bauer. He does not mind his name being used. He's pretty much a public figure at this point. He's had Bigfoot activity going on his property and the surrounding land since 2013, pretty much constantly. It was in 2013 when he was out deer hunting that he first found these giant 18-inch tracks in snow. And just like Ed Trimble before him, he knew about Bigfoot, had always heard about it, but never really gave it much thought, didn't have an opinion one way or the other about it, until he suddenly saw these tracks, and he didn't know what else to think. What makes giant bipedal tracks in the snow like this? But the weirdest thing about it was he followed them for a long way, but finally they went into a clearing and just stopped in the middle of a snowfield, like the thing had just vanished into thin air. And so that was 2013, and I didn't hear about it until 2019, and all kinds of other weird goings on had happened since then, including several sightings by both Randy himself and members of his family, people who would visit the property, neighbors who just happened to drive by, would see the things along the highway near his driveway. At this point, there's been well over a dozen sightings by multiple witnesses up there. It's the strongest case I've ever seen. It's the most intense case I've ever seen, and it's got this paranormal element to it that you don't usually find in Minnesota cases or even Bigfoot cases in general. And I first approached the Bigfoot field from the flesh and blood stance, like a lot of researchers do. I wanted to think of Bigfoot as a flesh and blood animal that it was at least possible to go out and find, even though it's very elusive and very intelligent. I didn't want to believe that there was anything supernatural or paranormal about it, even though that you do hear some stories along that vein. Well, once I met Randy and started visiting his place, started having experiences for myself, I've had to say I'm officially on the fence now. I'm not committed to saying I believe Bigfoot is a paranormal entity of some kind. I'm still holding out for the possibility that maybe there are some types of energy in the land up there that Bigfoot is intelligent enough to detect and tap into and interact with. I don't know, but there have been things as strange as Randy does a lot of sitting in deer stands at night and just staking out the woods like that. And one night, him and another man were in a deer stand, and they say that about 50 yards away from them, they saw this portal of light, just rectangular, looking like a door of light, just opened up against the darkness, and two orbs came out of it and just kind of floated over to a place nearby where Randy had peanut butter in a tree. He puts out jar after jar of peanut butter as bait, and he says the Bigfoots keep taking it. And so these orbs went over to where the peanut butter was, and then when they came back towards the portal, one of them was still in orb form, but the other one had morphed into like a Bigfoot light being, like the shape of a Bigfoot, but it was like made out of light. And they went back into this portal and disappeared, and then the portal disappeared. That's been the strangest report from up there so far.
Mm.
So can I ask a question? So they just came for the peanut butter? I'm
apparently.
It's really a question.
He started putting out peanut butter just as something to try. And well, you put out food, you're going to attract animals, and sometimes bears would get at the peanut butter, and when that would happen, he would find the jars just shredded on the ground. But when what he thought was the Bigfoots would take it, either the jar would disappear completely and never be found, or sometimes the lid would be unscrewed, there would be like a finger full of peanut butter taken out of it and eaten, and then the lid would be put back on, and it would be put back on the tree where he left it. Or sometimes they would take the jar, but they would leave the lids on the ground. And this went on for a long enough time that over time, a big collection of lids got accumulated on the ground, and he would leave them there to show to people. And they were putting the different colors of lids together, like all the red ones together, all the yellow ones together, all the blue ones together. So it shows an awful lot of intelligence there.
Did he get any of those, or did any of those lids get tested, do you know, or do you think they were just collecting to collect?
He has a lot of them in cold storage. He has a lot of hair samples that he's collected in cold storage. And Doug Hychek is working on a new documentary. He did this show called Sasquatch Legend Meets Science, and he's doing a part 2 of that. And I guess there's a segment of that is going to be devoted to Randy's case. And as part of that, once he starts working on that, he wants to have all of the evidence that Randy has collected analyzed for DNA and announce the results as part of the show.
That's exciting.
But Randy has had several sightings himself. The first one he saw was 9 feet tall and reddish brown. And the second one, he was alone when he saw that one. The next one he saw was a foot taller than that, 10 feet tall and black. And they were both in pretty much the exact same spot. He has a power line corridor that runs through his property. And they were both in that corridor next to the same power pole. And the poles have these black plastic collars on them that are 10 feet up that are to keep animals from climbing them. And that's how he was able to judge the height of the creature that was right next to it. The 10-foot one's head came right up to the bottom of that collar. He did see the black one again just this past Halloween, again in pretty much the same spot. And this time it turned out to be another paranormal type sighting because he said he was looking right at it and it disappeared in full view, just disappeared in thin air.
That would be amazing to see. Oh my goodness.
But from the sizes of tracks that have been found on the place, we think that in addition to those 2 great big ones, there are also 3 smaller ones that are in the 6 to 8 foot range. And there's also been some little 6-inch tracks found that would probably be about a 3 foot tall young one. So we think there's at least half a dozen of them on the property. And other weird stuff going on. There's been like a little bit of a poltergeist type activity inside the house. Not a lot of that, but just once in a while, something will happen that makes the place seem like it's haunted.
Can I ask what? Sorry to interrupt, but.
Things will get moved around. The TV has gotten turned on and off by itself.
Okay.
One night while Randy was asleep, his bedroom door was locked and something was in the house and was jiggling the door of the bedroom like it was trying to get in. And while that was going on, he felt paralyzed, like he couldn't get out of bed, like he was having sleep paralysis. Things like that just once in a while happen. And I've had some experiences there myself. He's had several group campouts there. There's a group called the SRA, the Sasquatch Research Association, that are based in Minnesota. He has invited them there and myself a few times. And in September of 2020, he had one of those big group gatherings. And Randy says he goes out in the woods regularly and he talks to these things. And he says, because the SRA has recommended that he do that. He says he feels goofy doing it, but he does it. And so right before that gathering, he said he went out and he talked to them and he just kind of assumes that they can hear him every time. And he said, hey, you guys, I've got some friends coming. They're okay. They just want to learn about you. So why don't you make sure you give them a good show? And it turned out that that's exactly what happened because everybody that was there either saw something or heard something that weekend. And do you guys know of a researcher named Andy Pieper at all?
I don't think so.
He was featured on Finding Bigfoot once. He did a recording down by Moose Lake that's known online as the Minnesota Howls. Anyway, he's an SRA member and he was there. He had 2 sightings in one day, one in daylight and one at night. And that night, what happened to me was I was staying in this trailer house that Randy has as a guest trailer, and was staying in the very back bedroom. And I'd been hearing like whoops and things like that, all kinds of vocalizations all night, and wood knocks and things like that. But it was finally about 3 a.m, and I was tired, and I was getting ready to go to bed, spreading my sleeping bag out on the floor. And all of a sudden I heard this soft little scrape on the outside of the trailer house. And there was no window in that room. And it didn't really startle me. It was just such a soft little sound. I just kind of went, what the heck was that? And I went to the next room where there was a window and looked out, but all I saw was pitch black. And I should have gone outside and looked around, but I didn't because I was tired, and I just went to bed. And when Randy and I went out there and looked in the morning, there were these white finger marks along the wall. And Randy has found these white marks on his house, on trail cameras that he puts out. He thinks it's something on their skin that leaves these white marks. And there were these 7 marks they were horizontal for about 3 feet. It looked like 4 fingers from one hand and 3 from the other. And the hands were the size of baseball gloves. So this thing had walked by right outside of where I guess it must have known that I was, and just kind of done that to give me a little heads up, or just to make sure that I had an experience of my own, or I don't know. I'll never know what the meaning of it was. But that meant that a Bigfoot was 8 feet away from me. And I was up there again just last month. There was another small gathering there. And I decided to sleep in my car on the first night there, which was parked about 50 feet from Randy's house. And there was a friend of Randy's was sitting in a deer stand for most of the night and until 4:30 in the morning, until he decided to come down and leave. This was after Randy had gone to bed. And I was in my car, half asleep and half awake, when all of a sudden I found myself awake, and I heard over by the house, which is about 50 feet from me, there was 2 other witnesses to it who described it as growling. To me, it sounded more like a throat clearing sound, but it was rising and falling in pitch. It was like, and I was so out of it, I was half asleep. I just kind of said to myself, okay, there's a Bigfoot standing by the house, and it doesn't know I'm in here. So, my car seat was laying down, and I said, don't sit up, don't look, just lay here. And then I drifted back to sleep, and I found out in the morning that this guy had just been leaving from sitting in the deer stand, and Randy's wife was leaving for work about that same time, and both of those people heard it right next to the house. And the guy from the deer stand, whose name is Brian Glynn, he thought that the thing had followed him back from the deer stand to the house. So I've now heard a vocalization from as close as 50 feet.
That's awesome.
And before I visited Randy's house, I had heard the screaming that I told you about up near Zirkle one time. That was the only vocalization I had ever heard in over 30 years of Bigfoot hunting. And I had never heard wood knocks before Randy's place. I had tried wood knocking and never gotten an answer. But I heard a wood knock the first time I ever visited Randy's place, and I've heard it half a dozen times there now, plus all this other stuff. And I'm going to be going up there again the last weekend of this month, and it's just such an active property. I feel like I'm always just a heartbeat away from having another sighting. I just have to be in the right place at the right time. And it was just like Ed's place. I knew that it was such an intense case, it was going to deserve its own book. So I did this most recent book of mine in 2021. It came out. And at first, jokingly, I was calling the place Bigfoot Disneyland because of how much activity there is there. And I wanted to call the book that, but a friend of mine said, you can't do that. The real Disneyland is going to sue you if you do that. So I came up with the title Sasquatch Central. I thought that was a pretty descriptive title for the place.
It is a great title for your book.
Definitely.
I think, yeah.
Definitely. Only thing I can think of is Sasquatch and big ducks. Black Duck has a giant duck statue there.
Oh, they have 3 of them, I think. They have one great big one and a couple of smaller ones.
All right. Well, I must just focus on the big one.
That's been my main place to go for 2.5 years now, but I still intend to get up to Chippewa National Forest and do some more exploring there. This year, I think you guys know Bob Olson and Don Sherman, the 2 researchers up there in Deer River and Ball Club. And I had seen online Don Sherman talking about this case of a Bigfoot being hit by a car recently, close to Ball Club, that was witnessed by a niece of his she was driving one way and another person was driving the other way, and this Bigfoot ran across the road in between the 2 cars, and not the niece's car, but the other one actually hit it, and then it got up and ran off. So I'm really interested in finding out more about that case.
Definitely.
And that was somewhere right near the Mississippi River up there. And, there was the Sammy Cleveland sighting at 6 Mile Lake, July 5th, 2016. Can't believe it's been that many years ago already.
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of exploring around 6 Mile Lake, and I know you guys have been around there too. Bob Olson gave me directions to get to the spot where Sammy's sighting happened, and so that was exciting to visit there. And there was a plaster cast that Don made up there at the site. And when I met Cliff Barrickman at this Bigfoot conference in Grand Rapids a couple of years ago, Cliff has a Bigfoot museum out in Oregon where he sells a lot of things, and he makes copies of famous Bigfoot casts and mass produces them. And he gifted me a copy of that Sammy Cleveland cast.
Oh, nice.
So that's really neat to have.
That is awesome.
And Sammy said that the Bigfoot he saw while he was in his canoe fishing was white, which is really rare. And he said it was 10 feet tall, even though the tracks it left were only about 15 inches. So I think he probably overestimated the height a little bit. But I remember being out there after hearing that description and being like, okay, where's this white Bigfoot? I want to see it. Show yourself. I want to see it right now.
Definitely.
But that's one of the areas where I put up a trail camera and got a mountain lion picture.
Oh, hey.
Yeah. Plus a bear picture and a lot of deer and just really active wildlife area. Haven't gotten any Bigfoot pictures yet.
Mike, I gotta say, we're towards the end of the show. Where can people find your books?
Primarily Amazon.com.
And that's under Mike Quast. Look for Mike Quast, Quast, on the Amazon. Look for his books there. Oh, and our children's book just came out on Amazon as well. So you can find it. It's called Adventures of Little JJ, The Quest to Save Bigfoot, featuring the She-Squatchers. So you can go check that out. I just shared a video about that recently on our Facebook page. It's a preview of the book, and it is... the vocals by Jenna. I was like, that sounds like Jenna.
It was.
All right, everybody. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you to our guest, Mike Quast, for joining us, and we will see you next week. Good night, everyone.
Thanks for having me.